So, you want to be a top 10,000 Amazon seller? Well, don't we all? In this video today, I break down a fascinating report that shows all of the detailed information on what a top Amazon seller looks like, using raw data, using important data, scouring all of the sellers on the platform. Let's go. All right, guys, if this is your first time here, welcome to Heist. This video is a cool one. We're going to break down really a data-driven approach and a data-driven report that shows exactly what the top sellers on Amazon look like. What are the data profiles? What do they sell? How do they sell? What do the SKUs look like, etc. So to dive into this, we're actually going to look at a report released by Smart Scout, which has a lot of research-based, data-driven approaches, scouring Amazon sellers to determine cool features. And their latest report is fascinating, looking at what top sellers do. So let's dive into it. Okay, so this is a report from Smart Scout. I'm going to drop a link down below as well as in the comments if you wanted to have a little peruse on your own. But let's go ahead and walk through this thing. So when it comes to selling on Amazon, you want to look and reflect what the top dogs are doing. I think that gives you a pretty good insight if that's where you want to be and where you want to grow to. You want to reverse engineer that, understand the distinct characteristics, and more importantly, the data characteristics of what these top sellers are doing. So this report is a fantastic breakdown that scoured the sellers on the marketplace to see what they're doing. So first of all, to become a top 10,000 seller, you might think that it's this grandiose $80 million plus. It's actually not. 2.6 million and above is what a top 10,000 seller does. So you are in the elite of the elite if you can crest into that north of $2.6 million figure. That makes it a lot more tangible, right? Like, hey, there's millions upon millions of sellers on the platform, but to be one of the elite, you're really cresting into that multiple seven-figure mark, which is really what the Heist channel is all about in terms of how do you identify and scale your business into that level. So that's the revenue thing, which I thought was actually quite fascinating. The controversial, or often controversial, topic of where do these sellers come from. First of all, the majority are in the US. I don't think that's any surprise. There's just north of 6,000 of them that are headquartered in the US. Obviously, some folks have an LLC or an entity that's in the US, so it might kind of skew things a little bit. But at least those with US-based entities, it's north of 60% of these top sellers, which makes sense for the US marketplace. But the next in line, which is not a surprise, is north of 33% of them come from Asia, more specifically from China, which means that 643 of those top 10,000 are scattered across other countries. If it's anything like the makeup of this channel, we probably have some Aussies, we probably have some Canadians in the mix. Go Canada, eh? And we probably have some Europeans that are in the mix as well. So a smaller splice outside of those two countries. So US, China dominating the top 10,000 mix of sellers. An important way to look at how these brands are growing is to look at how the feedback's growing. And so they've assessed what the review count and rating growth has been across these top sellers. And you get a pretty interesting breakdown here in terms of monthly, quarterly, biannual, as well as annual growth rates. So across all of them, the annual growth rate is roughly 86% in terms of feedback, which I think is pretty powerful. Shows that that's gone up quite a bit. Chinese sellers you'll see here is 160%. So obviously there's some things that are going on there. Again, I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole for this video, but they're doing some things to obviously escalate that growth. Could be introducing new SKUs that are going to increase reviews, could be introducing reviews at the ASIN level as well. US sellers are growing at the least amount, 53%, in addition to private label sellers. Resellers here are obviously seeing a significant amount of growth, and we'll get to resellers here in a second because I thought that was probably one of the more intriguing elements of this report. So onto that, so the breakdown of resellers and private label. I think most of us that are in the Amazon ecosystem starting out, building brands, we're doing the private label approach, right? We're creating our own brands, creating our own LLCs, identifying products, differentiating them, bringing them to the US and selling them from scratch. Resellers often are identifying existing products that are either on Amazon or in retail footprints throughout the US. They're introducing and or adding their seller buy box to that particular ASIN to make money. Oftentimes a little bit less margin in place, but you're riding the traffic waves of other people and you're not having to actually build the brand and build the traffic. So a foundational element of Amazon is these resellers, primarily of bigger brands. And there's some massive resellers. In fact, a couple here in the Utah marketplace where I'm from, Pattern being one of them, that literally represents and sells hundreds upon hundreds of major brands and really is the Amazon channel arm to many of these brands. So we don't think about it. I don't talk about it a lot on this channel, but there are some massive big dogs in that reseller space that make up and contribute to the top 10,000 sellers on Amazon. So if you look down this, there's actually 3,800 of these top 10,000, so roughly 38% that are selling 4 or more brands on Amazon. That could be their own brands, but that's often indicative of a reseller when you get into that north of 4 brand platform. There's actually 19% or 1,946 that are selling more than 20 brands. Those are almost definitely resellers on the platform. So there's definitely a strong representation, at least 20%, maybe up to 38% of these top 10,000 sellers that are actually resellers and not private labelers creating their own products. Getting down to the private label range, there's 5,400 that sell either 1 or 2 brands. So roughly half of the brands that are in the top 10,000 are 1 or 2 brand companies. These are the ones that you and I are building. These are the ones that the aggregators are buying. These are making up a fundamental element of the growth on the platform. But what's also interesting about this in terms of reseller is most of them are from the United States, which makes sense, right? These have to be wholesale relationships. You're getting contracts to resell products. You've got a warehouse and have a significant stateside logistical infrastructure, whereas on the China side, it's pretty difficult to pull that off for all the reasons I just discussed. So if you look here, there's only 272 resellers from China and roughly 2,800 private label sellers. Where on the US side, the majority of the top 10,000 US sellers appear to be actual resellers. So 3,300 resellers versus private labelers, which is 2,306. So I thought that was pretty fascinating as well. And then this is just a really cool category breakdown, which is relatively evenly spread, but you'll see sports and outdoors, toys and games, beauty, personal care, and home and kitchen are the top categories that these top sellers are coming from. And then in terms of some of the subcategories, a couple interesting things. There's 89 of the sellers that are actually in phone cases. So 1% of them are in phone cases. And then 88 are in books and 63 are in healthcare. So just some interesting category specific stuff there too. This is really interesting if you want to think about how you develop and grow your portfolio of products and ASINs over time in terms of reliance and the spread of ASINs in the mix of top sellers. So the top ASIN for private labelers represented 23% of their revenue, so a significant chunk. The top ASIN from resellers was 16% of their revenue. And then in the resellers, for those that had multiple brands, the top brand brought in 20% of the revenue. So again, it's typically going to be a hero product or a hero brand within the portfolio that's going to still drive a significant chunk of the overall revenue. Also interesting, you kind of think of these big dogs selling hundreds of thousands a month per product, maybe even millions a month per product. That's frankly just not the case. If you look here, how many $10,000 a month ASINs do each of these sellers have? First of all, for the resellers, they have an average of 18.5 ASINs that do over 10,000. For us as private labelers, though, 14 of the top ASINs, which make up 76% of the sales, do over $10,000. So pretty interesting stat there, I thought, in terms of $10,000 a month ASINs. And then here is the final point, which I also thought was super interesting if we want to kind of look at yardsticks. So to be a top 10,000 seller, one target is having over 2.6 million in revenue. We know that most of that's going to come, or roughly 20-30% is going to come from a hero ASIN. So a hero ASIN is pretty critical to driving the growth of a particular brand. You've got to have review count growth, minimum of 50%. It looks like the average is about 80%. So getting a mechanism to grow feedback, grow sales velocity to get more reviews. And then finally, the majority of sellers' revenue comes from between 14 and 19 products. So as much of a quarter of the revenue is coming from a single product, but the vast majority is going to be 14 to 19. So, you might need a little bit less than that to hit that 2.6 million. If you want to get into say $5-10 million, that sweet spot of about 20 products is going to be where the bulk of the revenue is going to come from. So if you kind of reverse engineer that again, how many products would I need to launch over time to get to 20 products launched, assuming some failures in the mix? Gives you a reverse engineering approach on how many you can launch a quarter, scaling into that top 10,000 seller status. So huge shout out to Smart Scout. I love their research reports that come out. I think they're fantastic. They're well thought out. They're data driven, and they scour the seller platform, extracting data that most of us lay people just frankly don't have access to. And it's really cool to kind of see these yardsticks, both because one, it humanizes it, right? It's nothing crazy or special about selling 2.6 million. I think it's very tangible. It's very doable. You can execute on this. But it also is interesting to see where the gaps in our own portfolios may exist that we need to cover to get to that level. So until next week, I've got a huge video dropping next week with some pretty massive news. So if this is your first time here, hit subscribe, hit the bell, be notified when we drop content. We like to just share information, build a cool community. We're not hawking stuff, we're not selling stuff. Hope you enjoy it. If you do, come along for the ride. See ya.